So yes, I guess it is safe to eat your bat.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about economics, politics, foreign policy, veterans issues, reform the criminal justice system, and drug laws. This channel probably will offend you, but most importantly, this is where socialism comes to die.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, let's try this again. I ended up having to stop halfway through filming this the first time because I was starting to have some issues, but I think I got them under control. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. That is the best thing you do to help me out in the algorithms and help the channel grow so that more people see the videos. If you don't like what I have to say, hit dislike, go ahead and subscribe and hate watch anyway, because that'll still help the algorithms. All right, let's talk about Wuhan and exactly where COVID came from and how it was transferred initially outside of that lab. Now, you're hearing a lot of people talk about gain of function. So I actually looked up so I could give you a definition of gain of function because I kind of understood it, but I don't want to sell you any bad information. Gain of function research refers to the serial passaging of microorganisms to increase their transmissibility, virulence, immunogenicity, and host tropism by applying selective pressure to the culture. All right, this is performed in a research context to understand the way in which a pathogen adapts to environmental pressures, allowing disease control measures to be better planned and potential vaccines and therapies explored. So that makes complete sense that they would want to do research like this to help come up with vaccines, to completely understand how it's transmitted, to understand how it we used a common flu for the example. Every year we have flu shots. Well, by the time from the time the flu season starts to the time the flu season ends, as that virus spreads, there's slight changes to it. This helps them understand that so they can better guess when it comes to immunizations. Makes complete sense. Part of the problem is, I'll get into this more at the end, but it can also be used in an offensive manner as far as creating military grade biological weapons. And there's a book and an author who defected from Russia to the United States in 1992, who I actually had the opportunity to meet quite a few years ago now, and he was the one that ran the program for the Soviet Union up until he defected in 1992. So that tells you the Russians were still working on it even after the wall came down. Now, what's interesting about this is in 2014, President Obama banned the testing and banned support for the testing. But there were two people allowed to sign off on funding for these tests. One was Dr. Fauci at the National Allergy and Infectious Disease. He was the director of that. The other was the director of NIH. And they funded or they provided money through what was it? Echo. Okay, here we go. The National Institute of Health earmarked $600,000 for the Wuhan Institute of Virology over a 5-year period to study whether bat coronavirus could be transmitted to humans. Okay, here's a secret. The answer is yes. I think we discovered that. All right, there we go. Yeah, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He had the ability to sign off on that money going to labs where research was being done. Now he's sworn up and down that that was not what that money was earmarked for. Well, here's the problem in a place like China. Even when it comes to a grant from outside of China, they're only going to give you so much authority to look into where that money is going because they're not going to give up that control. And like I said, we'll get more into it in the end with some of the biological weapons stuff that was being done in the Soviet Union, because that's really the base for a lot of what the world learned about looking into these systems. And right now, it's already far too late to go to that lab and see if something was done there because they've cleaned it up. They've gotten rid of it. They probably sent the people that could actually say that they were worried about saying something about it to camps, kind of like the Uyghur Muslims, but we won't get into that discussion. Well, we will at the end because I have to. All right. The president now came out and called for a new investigation by the intelligence agencies. Nevertheless, shortly after I became president in March, shortly after he became president, that's like 3 months, dude. Come on. Come on, man. I had my national security advisor task the intelligence community to prepare a report on their most up to date analysis on the origins of COVID 19. Now, that's important for two reasons. One, it brings those intelligence agencies, well, it's supposed to bring them together to share information to conduct the investigation. But the Senate also unanimously passed a bill that said that intelligence has to be declassified. And that's a double edged sword because the one thing that scares intelligence agencies is, other than admitting that they make mistakes, is admitting, or not admitting, but exposing methods and sources. And part of it in a place like China with a particular site like Wuhan, there may be certain things that only a limited number of people know. And if that is brought out in public, it's fairly easy for the Chinese Communist Party to corral the 4 or 5 people that actually knew that. So you're giving up a human source that they probably got information from. So that's where we have to be very careful. And that's why I'd like people to understand sometimes when these intelligence reports are declassified, but there's redacted information, that's where they black it out or it's blanked out. Many times it's because that particular piece of information can expose a particular source or a collection method, be it a satellite, be it electronics interception. Just keep that in mind when you look at this. It's not always that they're trying to hide something from you. It's that they're trying to protect the equipment or the person that gave us that information, which is kind of important. Because if we don't do that, then people will stop talking to them. Now, the issue I have with this is the Trump administration had an investigation going, which either the answer we've gotten is that it ran its course. Well, now the same intelligence agencies are being tasked to do the exact same thing again. So either A, the incoming administration spiked the old investigation and just let it go because they were going to have to admit that the man they just appointed to be in charge of their COVID, getting rid of COVID, was giving money to the same lab that it may have leaked from. Well, at least now in social media, you could say it may have been a leak from a lab. And I say leak because I don't think it was an intentional exposure as a bio attack on the world from China. I don't think that's what happened. I think there's been issues throughout history, if you research bioweapons, where there's been leaks, there's been accidental exposures to people who work there. It happens. There's been some real tragic things that have happened, but not on purpose. And I think this was just an accident. But the only people that can give us the answer are China, and they're not talking. So, and they're not going to. But now with the investigation going back in, well, now they're going to find out, they're going to admit that money was given, signed off by Dr. Fauci to the lab in Wuhan. Well, now that's been exposed. And now there's congressmen and senators that are calling for Fauci to step down because he hasn't been, a lie by omission is still a lie, I guess is the best way to say it. But I'm interested in the investigation and interested in what they're going to find. Now, part of what we've been going through is the World Health Organization, WHO, who the Trump administration defunded. Well, now the funding is going back to them. And one of the complaints for why it was defunded then was that China has far too much influence over it. And part of that can almost be proven by some of the comments that have been made. The WHO the WHO convened investigation has been criticized by the U.S. and other countries. A March 30 statement on behalf of the governments of the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and a number of other countries described shared concerns that the international expert study on the source of SARS-CoV-2 virus was significantly delayed and lacked access to complete and original data and samples. Scientific missions like these should be able to do their work under conditions that produce independent and objective recommendations and findings. Now, The WHO initially said they don't think it came from a lab leak. They think it was a natural occurrence where it transferred from a bat to a human. And just because that was the first time it's happened, it would not be all that unusual. Well, it would be unusual, but it would not be unheard of from a standpoint of a virus transferring like that. The more plausible answer is somehow it leaked out of the lab in Wuhan. It was probably infected workers from the lab that came out and infected more people and spread. We now know there were 3 workers at some point last November, which is about when everything initially started, that ended up having to be hospitalized that worked in Wuhan. So just think about that. What on purpose? It's workers are exposed. They go home. They spread it when they don't realize they have anything. In fact, they probably just thought they had the flu. It ends up spreading, and we get to where we are now. The Chinese are never going to admit culpability in anything. And in fact, any evidence that's there is long gone by now. Now, there was an interesting conversation May 11th with Dr. Fauci and Senator Rand Paul, who, if you don't know, Rand Paul is a doctor. So he does have some basis to have a leg to stand on and argue with Dr. Fauci about this. Now, Senator Paul said, juicing up superviruses is not new. Scientists in the U.S. have long known how to mutate animal viruses to infect humans. For years, Dr. Ralph Barrick, a virologist in the U.S., has been collaborating with Dr. Shi, I'm not even trying to say it, of the Wuhan Virology Institute, sharing his discoveries about how to create superviruses. This gain-of-function research has been funded by the NIH. Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding the lab in Wuhan? Dr. Fauci's reply, Senator, with all due respect, you're entirely wrong and completely incorrect. The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, that's the term I was looking for earlier that I forgot. Okay, gain-of-function is an insider term. Terms that are subject to different definitions. So if you stop and think about it, then in Wuhan, considering they don't speak English, gain of function could have a completely different name. And that's what's coming back in the reports to keep that grant going. Now, if that's the case, then nobody's actually lying to anybody except for Fauci understanding when he reads what they're doing is actually gain of function testing or gain of function research by another name. Well, what's the old saying? A rose by any other name is still a rose. Or in this case, a turd by any other name is still a Fauci. All right, but the actual term for it's zoonotically, which is where it transfers from a human or from an animal to a human, or a human to an animal, which would be even worse in some cases. Because I like animals more than I like most people. Anybody that knows me well knows that. Well, here's the problem with even getting access to the lab now. And it's a huge issue. And it came about, I actually first understood how this worked after reading Dr. Ken Albeck. He was the bio researcher that worked for years in the Soviet Union and at one point actually ran BioApparat, which was their bioweapons facility. But he wrote a book, Biohazard. Really, it's a great book, and it lays out exactly the whole history of it, his time working there and running it, why he became disaffected because of what he was being told there did not pan out. Because at that point in the 80s, the United States and the Soviet Union had agreed to do inspections. And so our facilities that were doing any kind of biological or chemical warfare testing had to be purely defensive, like creating new vaccines or new protective clothing and masks. And in theory, theirs had to be the same. So we come to inspections, and he was one of the experts they sent over to inspect ours. And he had been told all these years that the Americans are lying. They're really doing the same offensive research we are. And when he came over to do inspections, he realized that was not the case. The facilities were not designed to do offensive testing. Whereas in the Soviet Union, his facilities were completely designed for offensive testing. And there would be huge cleanups before the American or NATO inspectors came in. And he talks about it in the book about exactly what they had to do to clean these things up and move equipment around. And it's really terrifying to think of. But if you think about the regime in a place like China or North Korea, there's no reason they wouldn't be doing this. I mean, there's over 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. They're threatening Taiwan. And then you have Big Tough John Cena, who apologizes for referring to Taiwan as a country. Come on, really? Hollywood is so owned by the Chinese at this point, it's ridiculous. It really is. And if we don't do something about this, if we don't, I keep saying, let's start moving stuff out of China. Let's start forcing companies to move their manufacturing to other places. I use the example of Vietnam all the time. And they want us to come there. The Chinese, Hollywood, who stands up for human rights and this and that and the other, and they will let China get away with anything because they're freaking owned by them. And no matter what anybody does, it's just the way it is. We've allowed it to happen. So I don't have an answer for how to change it other than I don't know if boycotts work or not. I really don't. But there's got to be a solution. And the only solution I can come up with is what I'm doing now, and that's trying to keep people informed. The average person's got to get up and go to work every day. You don't have time to spend as much time as I do watching, reading, and listening to the news. So all I want to do is give you a short 10 to 20 minute version of what's going on or certain things that are going on. And if there's something you want me to dig into to do a video on, please let me know by all means. But please like, subscribe, share with your friends. That does more than anything else to help. And if you're not subscribed, because analytics say the majority of you are not subscribers, please subscribe. Let's get those numbers up. And that way more people will see these videos. The other thing is stand up and use your voice on social media. I understand if you have a job that limits what you can or can't say. So just start your social media footprint within those parameters. And then once you do that, people will start listening to what you have to say. I'm proof of that. I started in November, and the channel has grown rapidly since then. So apparently there's people out there that like the message I'm putting out. Apparently there's some that don't, because I see that in the messages I get on Twitter and Instagram, but that's okay. I'm a big boy. I have thick skin. I can handle it. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. Everybody take care of yourselves and have a good evening.